These are the many faces of neurofibromatosis. All ages, all races, both genders. Diverse backgrounds, different locations, a wide range of family situations. Some with outward manifestations, some without. But all of these individuals have one thing in common: the determination to live life to its fullest, despite the burdens of an illness that can cause a range of physical and emotional turmoil. Blindness, deafness, malignancies, disfigurement, learning disabilities, loss of limbs, and although rarely, even death.
But having enough, it changed my life a lot. But in some ways, I wouldn't want not to have enough because my life wouldn't be what it is today.
I'm just a normal kid, not thinking about most stuff. I'm just doing what I usually would do in my life because I don't really let the tumor get into my mind too much because then I get like all worried about nothing and then I just keep getting the dreaded what ifs in my head.
I don't have a choice in whether or not I have it. It's just something I've got, and it's something I accept I have.
Historical records and literature dating back to ancient Greece show evidence of neurofibromatosis. But it wasn't until 1882 that a German scientist, Dr. Friedrich von Recklinghausen, first correctly identified the commingling of nerve cells and fibrous tissue that cause multiple neurofibromas. More recently, research has led to the discovery of two distinct forms of neurofibromatosis, NF1 and NF2.
NF1 is actually a relatively common disorder. The incidence is about 1 in 3,000. NF2 is much less common. The incidence is approximately 1 in 50,000. NF1 is a disorder which is localized to a problem on chromosome 17. It is characterized by a lot of skin lesions, cafe au lait spots, dermal neurofibromas, and relatively uncommon internal lesions. NF2 is a disorder which is localized to chromosome 22, which is characterized by multiple brain and spinal cord tumors and relatively little on the skin.
Most people with NF have a very mild and hardly noticeable form of the disorder, often no more than a few brown spots on the skin. For some, however, NF causes more serious problems: small multiple tumors on the skin, large tumors on an arm or leg, facial disfigurement, and for some, internal tumors along the nerves anywhere inside the body or brain.
NF1 and 2 are considered to be autosomal dominant disorders and as such are typically inherited from a parent, though in both the incidence of so-called spontaneous mutation or a sporadic case occurring is actually quite high. About 50% of the cases are sporadic. NF was thought to be associated with the so-called elephant man, but we now know that the person who was known as the elephant man actually had a rare syndrome which is totally unrelated to NF and is called the Proteus syndrome.
According to the National Institutes of Health, a diagnosis of NF1 is appropriate when 2 or more of the following features are present: 6 or more cafe au lait spots in adults, or 6 or more cafe au lait spots in children, 2 or more neurofibromas, or 1 plexiform neurofibroma, freckling under the arms or in the groin area, optic glioma, Lish nodules, bone abnormalities, affected parent, sibling, or child. A diagnosis of NF2 is appropriate when 2 or more of the following features are present: bilateral acoustic neuromas, or affected parent, sibling, or child, and any one of the following: neurofibroma, schwannoma, glioma, meningioma, cataracts.
Neurofibromatosis poses 2 challenges in daily medical practice. One is realizing that a person actually is affected when their signs may be quite subtle, and it's very important not to overlook these signs, for example, cafe au lait spots, as evidence that a person really has neurofibromatosis. But on the other hand, there also is a tendency sometimes to overstate the severity of neurofibromatosis to a family and to make it out to be more of a medical problem than sometimes it is. And so I think it's very important both to recognize the early signs of neurofibromatosis and also to put this condition in its perspective.
Because NF can affect so many different parts of the body, an individual with NF can benefit most from a multidisciplinary approach to the disorder. Specialists in neurology, orthopedics, genetics, ophthalmology, dermatology, plastic surgery, neurosurgery, pediatrics, oral surgery, ENT, and oncology may all play a role in care and treatment. Martha Laughlin is an ultrasound technologist at the Boston VA Medical Center. She was diagnosed with NF2 in 1987.
When I was at Northeastern University, that was back in 1986, that I was a freshman in college. And everything was fine. And about towards the end of my freshman year, I started noticing I had trouble on the telephone talking on my radio. And around the same time, one of my good friends noticed I was having trouble hearing him correctly. And so then it was, I think the summer following that, all of a sudden, it didn't take very long, I lost almost all the hearing in my radio.
When we found out that our daughter had NF2, we were both devastated. My husband is a physician, and I think that made it even more difficult because it had been we'd gone through such trouble to get a diagnosis. And I think as a father and a physician, he really felt very helpless.
And when I found out I had NF, I was a little scared, and I was a little nervous and unsure. But I also didn't understand everything at the time because I was young, and nobody really knew that much about it then, so nobody could tell me. I mean, they stuck it, but nobody could tell me this is what's going to happen, and this is what might happen and what might not happen.
When we found out that she had neurofibromatosis, my original reaction was to try and protect her from all of this. But after much discussing it, my husband and I, we decided that this was not fair to her. And really, almost from day one, she's become her own case manager, made the decisions on her own. She's been through 3 horrific surgeries and has come out better for them, I think.
Joe Lewin is a sports writer for the Trenton Times in New Jersey. He was diagnosed with NF1 as a young child.
My parents were open and honest with me. My father has it, so I inherited it from him. So they were just very open with it and they weren't protective. They went the extra mile to find the doctors and the top specialists for myself and my younger brother to see as a result of the disease. As an adult, when I've been looking for a doctor, it's been a little hard finding doctors that know about NF. Because the doctor I went to as a child that was willing to keep up on it retired, and so now that I'm on my own, just took me a few calls and a little bit of research to find a physician that knows what NF is and keeps up on it. I found this site on the World Wide Web that the national organization has that has lots of information for new patients and old patients alike. And there's support group sites on Prodigy and America Online, both of which I have and I'm very active on. So it's just, like I said, every avenue I have or I know of that keeps me active in it, I follow.
Andrew Idenden is 12 years old. Diagnosed with NF as an infant, his parents chose not to tell him about it until he was 10.
And we had scoliosis testing at school, and the doctor there said that I had a scoliosis, and they sent me to a doctor. So they gave me an x-ray there. And then they said that there was something there, but they couldn't identify it. So they sent me to another doctor. And at that doctor, I had the MRI. And then they said, yes, I have neurofibromatosis. And it was on my back, so that's why my back was curving.
Andrew's pediatrician knew nothing about NF at all. If it hadn't been for the special neurosurgeon that we went to, we would have been pulling our hair out, because as it turned out, the information that we got from NF Foundation, we made Xerox copies of it and gave it to Andrew's pediatrician, because he didn't have any information at all, and he just vaguely knew what it was.
Anyway, I had the back pains, and it sort of scared me because I didn't know what it was. But when they told me I had neurofibromatosis, I got the idea that it was a tumor, so I wasn't that scared about it anymore, but I was scared about the operation.
Andrew is still a very active child. Andrew participates, even though last year he was in 7th grade. He was in the high school marching band, and he kept up with the rigors of going to competitions and the long hours of practice. It hasn't slowed him down. He's a lot stronger about this than his parents and grandparents.
There are several astonishing things about neurofibromatosis which should give it the attention from the general population that it doesn't now have. First, NF is much more common than people realize. Secondly, it can hit any family regardless of gender or race or ethnic origin. Thirdly, these two genes causing NF1 and NF2 are implicated in the development of several of the most important and deadliest cancers in humans. And fourthly, there is a puzzling connection to learning disabilities. Learning disabilities occur about 10 to 15% in the general population, but they occur about 50 to 60% in the NF population. It all began with trying to find out where the genes are located, and that happened in 1987. The next was finding the two genes responsible for the two forms of NF. The next was identifying the proteins that the two genes produce. Without that, we could not do anything about manipulating the genes. We did that for NF1 within the first 3 weeks of the discovery. In NF2, it also occurred very shortly after finding the gene. This then has started scientists to think how they can correct the defects in these proteins. And that's where we are now.
There is no cure at the present time, nor is there any treatment other than for surgical removal of the growths, neurofibromas. We are, however, conducting experimental trials of drugs which we hope will prevent neurofibromas from growing.
Well, we're focusing at the moment on methods of diagnosis, trying to identify the specific gene mutations responsible for NF in affected individuals. That should provide us diagnostic tests for either persons who have a family history of NF or who are suspected of having the disorder where it hasn't been proved yet.